It was supposed to be a day of joy. Eggs, laughter, sunlight, and family. But sometimes Easter doesn't bring rebirth. It brings something that should have stayed buried. 3 celebrations, 3 families, 3 horrors that began with a smile and ended in silence. From a quiet church service in the woods, to a missing child on an Easter egg hunt, to the stranger who came knocking just before midnight. These are disturbing, true Easter horror stories. You're watching Nazir Fears, where every story is real and every fear is earned. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next true story that turns light into darkness. Easter Sunday began with fried eggs and a quiet house full of plans. The kind of soft morning that convinces you the world has rehearsed its kindness just for your family. And if you looked at the calendar and the supermarket flowers and the foil-wrapped chocolates on the counter, you could almost pretend that nothing complicated ever lived outside your door. Lena set the ham to roast and slid hot cross buns into the oven while the twins argued at the table about who would find more eggs in the backyard later, and her husband Daniel, who'd promised he wouldn't do any quick runs. Nevertheless, buttoned half a shirt and said he had to dash to the petrol station for more ice, because his mother liked her orange juice ruined by cubes, and he would be back in 10, 15 at most. The house smelled like nutmeg and clove and citrus peel, the oven glass clouded with surrender, and on the sideboard lay a church bulletin from last year that the twins had coloured in with jelly bean fingerprints, and Lena, applying the foil to a dish, thought how lovely it would be if time were only this. Small chores, a parade of plates, a family arranged around a table like proof that life had kept a promise. The first knock came while she was rinsing a knife, 3 gentle taps that sounded almost rehearsed, and when she opened the door, the morning air carried in the distant sound of children on neighboring lawns shrieking in triumph at pastel eggs. And the man on her porch smiled with the kind of politeness you could mistake for respect if you were still the sort of person who believed in Easter as a shield. He was mid-30s, maybe 40, hair too neat in a way that suggested effort rather than vanity, wearing a navy jacket and holding a white bakery box tied with gold string. "Good morning," he said, his voice pitched low for courtesies. "I'm terribly sorry to intrude on your holiday. I'm from St. Martin's just down the road. We're dropping off surplus buns for families on the street, and I didn't see your car in the drive earlier when we were doing rounds, so I thought I'd circle back." The words were arranged correctly, Lena noticed, all the phrases you'd expect on the right hooks, and maybe on any other day she would have said thank you, and taken the box, and gone back to her roast, and her twins, and her text from Daniel, back in 10, promise. But something stuck. There was no St. Martin's on their road, not exactly. St. Martin's was 3 turns over on Ridge Lane behind the grocery, and they never did door-to-door anything, the vicar had said so during lockdown. No more pester evangels, as he jokingly called them. And yet the bakery box smelled like nutmeg and clove and citrus peel, as if it had been borrowed from her own oven, and the man's hands were steady, patient, empty of anything but that white square of gift. She said, "That's kind of you," and hesitated, her body trying to find a boundary her mouth might catch up to, and he gave a little apologetic shrug, as if aware of the suspicion built into new courtesies now, and said, "I can leave them right here, if you prefer. Just wanted to make sure they didn't end up with the birds." And his eyes flicked past her, not to the twins or to the counter, but to the small brass plaque they'd screwed into the hallway wall, with the 4 digits of the house alarm code etched for babysitters. Covered by a magnet, yes, always covered, but visible as a habit if you knew what you were looking for. And Lena felt something tense under the ankle of the moment, like a thread pulled taut. "Porch is fine," she said, keeping her body in the doorway, and he nodded like a man who understands a safety drill, and bent to set the bakery box on the mat. His navy jacket tightened, and she saw, not a weapon, nothing dramatic, just the silhouette of a hard rectangle clipped inside the breast pocket. Could be a card case, could be a small notebook, could be something else. And when he straightened, he smiled at the twins, who had by now come to lean against their mother's leg to see what gift had arrived, and said in a tone that made their names sound like a trick he'd learned in advance, "This must be Maddie and Sam." Lena felt the knife she had been rinsing still in her right hand, water trailing off the blade toward her wrist. Felt the way the twins stiffened because children know when a stranger says your name right without a reason. "We're across the road for the 11 o'clock, he added, a conversational dart thrown toward normalcy. "Should you wish to join us, Father Andrew is telling the Road to Emmaus story to the little ones, and we've hidden a few eggs in the church garden." And this time he didn't look at her as he said "garden." He looked toward the side of the house, the way you'd look if you knew how far a person's fence ran and where the latch on the gate was because you'd tried it. "We already have plans," Lena said, moving her foot a deliberate inch forward so the door could not open any wider, and when the twins whispered, "Can we have the buns?" she said, "We'll see," which in their house meant likely no, and the man spread his hands the way people do, when they are either giving up or pretending to, and said, of course, he is risen," a phrase that should have sounded like joy, like a trumpet in a sunny field, and instead felt, on his tongue, like a password offered to the wrong door. He went down the steps and along the walk with unhurried steps, turned once as if to say something else, then didn't, and disappeared into the blur of cars and hedges and light. Lena closed the door and locked the deadbolt, and felt foolish immediately, because what had he done but leave bread? What had she done but overread a neighborly act? And yet she did not bring the box in. She placed it on the far edge of the porch table and texted Daniel. "A man from St. Martin's came by with buns. Is that a thing?" And Daniel sent back a photo of a shelf of bags of ice and the caption "Church people love errands," which didn't answer the question. She searched the camera app and scrolled briefly through the doorbell history, and there he was. Neat, navy, bakery box, smiling. And beneath the video a partial capture of license plates as a silver hatchback crept past, then paused, and then, in a decision that looked almost like boredom, moved on. She returned to the kitchen, and the twins asked to go out to the yard and hide the plastic eggs, just to practice. And she said, "Okay, but stay where I can see you," which was how parents said, "Please don't vanish in daylight." And she turned back to the oven and listened to the house. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the cooling burner, the voices of her children migrating from the concrete patio to the lawn, and then toward the old cedar by the fence where the neighbor's yard began. And as she lifted the lid of the pot to baste the ham, the doorbell chimed again, 2 notes only, apologetic. She wiped her hands, checked the window first, and saw no one. Only the box, the mat, a smear of sunlight creeping across the boards. And then a voice, not from the door, but from the side gate, where the slats had a crack wide enough for the twins to peer through when friends came, called softly, "Maddie, Sam, do you want a hint where the golden egg is?" It was the kind of voice adults use when they aim friendship at children, and Lena felt her skin go tight. She didn't think. She moved. She crossed the kitchen, kicked off the soft slippers that made her footsteps swallow themselves, and reached the sliding door to the yard in 3 strides, yanked it open hard enough that the frame knocked a spoon to the floor, and stepped into the white sound of the morning where a woman stood inside their yard as if she'd grown there. Pale blue cardigan, sensible shoes, a lanyard with a laminated name badge that said, "Greta, volunteer," and in her hands a woven basket full of foil eggs that caught sunlight and threw it like lies. "Oh," the woman said, startled as if she had been the one intruded upon. "I'm with the church group. Sorry, dear. I thought you were, out back. We're doing a little surprise hunt for the wee ones on the lane." She smiled at the twins, who had stopped mid-giggle and now held plastic eggs like evidence. "Gate was open," she added, and then, "Is your husband home?" The question ripped the morning like seam ripper through fabric, tiny and precise and somehow the only thing you could hear. Lena's hands found each other without being told, and she said, "No," then heard herself correct instantly, "Yes," which in one syllable told the woman too much. "I'll show you which eggs to save for later," the woman went on, stepping closer with the ease of people who belong, and her basket smelled faintly, not like chocolate, not exactly, like laundry and lilacs and something under it that didn't belong to spring at all. Lena blocked her with a gentle but immovable stance and said, "You can leave the basket by the fence and I'll return it this afternoon." And the woman's smile did not move on her face in a way that warned of practice, as if it had been put there by a careful hand. "No trouble," Greta said, and tilted the basket so that one golden egg rolled toward the twins, and Maddie reached as if a string had tugged her fingers. "Not yet," Lena said, her voice too sharp to be a mother voice, and Maddie looked up hurt, and then, as if following choreography, as if arriving on a cue, the navy jacket man's voice floated from the front garden. "Greta, I think perhaps we should leave them be." And he appeared at the corner like a chosen card, hands empty this time, and he dipped his head with a humility that didn't touch his eyes. "Apologies again," he said. "We meant only to share." He looked past Lena to the kitchen, to the panel where the alarm keypad glowed factory green, and then to the twins' shoes neatly lined by the door, and then to the tray of cooling hot cross buns on the counter. For a second, the world compressed into an arrangement of objects that could be counted, inventoried, memorized. Lena thought of the brass magnet over the etched code, of the gate latch that tended to sag if you didn't lift while you slid, of the path from the side yard to the garage, where the internal door sometimes didn't catch unless you banged it. "We appreciate the thought," Lena said, as calmly as she knew how, "but we have everything we need." They left quickly then, the pair of them, and if that had been the end of it, the day would have swollen again around the bruise and carried the family forward to the feast, and the arguments about which cousin cheated at the egg and spoon. Daniel returned with ice, and a disbelief that collapsed into, "You did the right thing." And his mother arrived with behind-the-hand comments about the ham being brave, and a ribboned plant that would die within days, and the twins did their egg hunt while the adults clapped like an audience for a rehearsal nobody loved. The day moved as planned. The table was laid. The carved meat cooled on its platter. The tea was poured and forgotten, and laughter knit itself as a gesture so familiar it could be faked without guilt. But even in that bright-lit safety, Lena found herself doing the small new rituals that had entered her bones a year earlier when a car had followed her from a supermarket to a petrol station, and then not when she had pulled into a well-lit lot and then felt silly and gone home to check her mirrors twice. She checked the latch on the side gate every time a breeze shifted the hedges. She glanced at the porch camera feed, not because she expected anything, but because her body was a dog trained to watch the door. She kept the bakery box unopened on the outside table until the sun had marched across the boards and made the string glow tired. After dessert, when the twins had scattered into the yard again with their cousins, and Daniel's mother had migrated to the sofa to narrate her latest offense, a text arrived from an unknown number that contained, with the indifference of an automated service, only 2 words: "Gate open." Lena stood so fast, her chair scraped the tile like a dragged blade, and Daniel said, "What now?" And she said, "Nothing," and crossed the kitchen the way you walk if you want to look like you're not running. The gate was closed. The lock hung like always, cheap and sufficient for wind. She checked the porch camera feed and rewound. There was the yard, then the blankness of clouds, then the stutter of a bird, then, briefly, the frame of a shoulder and a piece of cardstock pressed against the lens, so close that all you could see was a white field and the faint embossed cross of St. Martin's. When the card withdrew, the yard was untouched. She saved the clip. She saved it again, under a second name, as if doubling it would make it true. Daniel watched the replay and said the thing men say when the thing is real, but you need it to be smaller. Probably kids. But the cardstock had been too still in the shot, too careful. Evening leans its heavy arm across holidays, the same way it does across ordinary Tuesdays. By 7, the family had gone. The dishwasher sighed about its duty. The twins built a fort of sofa cushions and threatened to sleep there. Daniel went upstairs to collect bedding. And the house took a breath Lena didn't like. She opened the bakery box at last, because the not knowing had a weight she wanted to move. And inside were buns, 8, perfect, glazed, scored in crosses, and tucked under the paper at the corner. Not hidden exactly, not announced either. A folded photocopy flyer on thin church office stock. Easter outreach, St. Martin's, volunteer list. A table with names down the left, phone numbers across, time slots in gentle columns, and 2 names highlighted in yellow. Greta, 2:04 p.m., and Andrew, float. No surnames, no addresses. The numbers blurred when she leaned in because her eyes had suddenly remembered. They were tired, but she recognized the format of her own neighborhood exchange group. The way people list themselves in a safety net that looks like a spreadsheet. It would be nothing to make yourself Andrew if you could say, "He is risen," with the right church tone tilt. She took a photo of the list and sent it to her friend Irene, who never missed a service and wore her hair like a verdict, and knew all the volunteers by story, if not by name. The reply came fast, no one named Greta at our place. Father Andrew retired last summer. New guy's name is Tim. There was a pause, and then a second message. You okay? Want me to come by? Lena typed. We're fine because letting someone in is admitting there's a hole, and then she locked the front door and the back and the side and, for the first time in a year, armored the internal garage door with the heavy chain they'd installed after Daniel read an article about night entries. Upstairs voices softened to bedtime things, then to the absence of them, and the house made its small noises like mice auditioning for a cartoon. At 10:30, when Daniel's breathing had found the slow wave that meant he would wake only if his name were torn from sleep, Lena sat on the top stair with her phone and watched the live doorbell view the way people watch aquariums, hoping for nothing but calm. She saw the porch light halo moths into clumsy angels. She saw her own reflection in the dark glass. She saw, at 10:48, movement not at the door, but at the side of the frame where the wall met the trim. The faintest shadow slice, like a blink in wood, and then the lens dimmed and brightened once as if the world had passed a hand across its face, and when it cleared the bakery box was gone from the porch table. The feed didn't show a hand. The feed didn't show a body. Only absence, the emptiest theft. She should have woken Daniel then, should have called Irene, should have dialed the non-emergency line and said the sentences that felt dramatic in cities where drama was rationed. But Lena did what people do when reality nicks you without bleeding. She waited to see if the world would offer a reason. At 11:03, the doorbell chimed the gentle 2-note again, and the porch view filled with nothing but the dark. It chimed a second time, and she stood slowly, because slowness felt like armor, walked down the stairs and across the hallway, put her hand on the deadbolt, and spoke through the wood with the clarity of people who have decided their life must be their own. We're not opening the door. Please leave. There was a pause. and then a voice she recognized as Greta's, because politeness is a fingerprint, said, "We'll just leave you something for the little ones." And Lena almost laughed, because the phrase had been engineered to fit her house. She turned on the porch light to its highest setting, waited, then flicked it off and on wildly in a private semaphore that meant, "I see you, I see you, I see you." And then she pressed the alarm's panic button, and the house shrieked itself into an animal, a sound that didn't necessarily bring help, but at least instructed the night to pay attention. Daniel stumbled to the landing. The twins began a tangle of questions from their doorway. The siren split the calendar into before and after, and Lena kept her eyes on the small live square that showed the porch glowing like a stage devoid of cast. Later, there would be the police, a patient pair whose notes made offense into inventory. They would watch the clips and nod and say the word organized and the word testing, and the phrase low-level probing, with the knowledge that comes from seeing the same shape in too many houses. Later, someone would figure out that the photocopy flyer had been lifted from a real bulletin a year ago, and retyped with names that belonged to no one, and that the number listed for Greta led to a dead voicemail greeting, and the one for Andrew texted back a cartoon rabbit. Later, too, a neighbor would mention a silver hatchback that had idled by the hedges, in the way of cars that have nowhere to be except near your address. All of that would be later. What remained that night, after the alarm was reset and the twins lay between their parents the way children do when the dark is newly complicated, was the carefulness. The way Lena moved through her own kitchen, as if the corners were watching, the way Daniel turned the chain twice, and then a third time, the way the porch light felt like both a lighthouse and a confession. The next morning, Easter Monday, Lena stood on the steps with a mug and watched the street perform normal. Bins at the curb, a jogger. The newspaper landed in its usual stupid place. Across the road, a new flyer had been rubber-banded to the neighbor's gatepost, crisp, white, with a cross, and the words, St. Martin's, Community Easter Blessing, Volunteers Welcome, and in pen, neat, a time, 2 to 4. She took it down and folded it once, then again, and put it in the drawer that held batteries and tape and warranties, the drawer where families keep the things they might need when a device stops pretending to work. That afternoon, she opened the side gate and found the latch had been adjusted. Not broken, not forced, adjusted, the angle corrected with a care Daniel would not have bothered with, so that it would close more quietly next time. She stared at it for a full minute, while something in her ribs learned a new rhythm. Then she lifted it, closed it, lifted again. She watched the street a while after that, and when a silver hatchback turned onto their lane, and then immediately turned off again, she knew two things, with the kind of tired certainty that leaves no space for panic. First, that nothing had been random about a man with a box and a woman with a basket. And second, that in houses like hers, on holidays like Easter, fear doesn't arrive with masks or blood. It arrives with good manners and correct phrases, and hands that remember how your latch works better than you do. And it waits, for a year, or for a night, or for the precise minute your door is the easiest door on the street, to ask, softly, for your permission to come in.